Okay, is our court reporter here this morning?
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Hi, Ms. Quimby. All right, I'll have to remember to say Quimby and not O'Brien. Nice to meet you. Thanks for being with us. Are you
Sure.
ready to go on the record?
Let me just write down who is here because I just got let in. So let me get these names down. Okay.
All right, let's go on the record. Good morning. It's March 6th, 2025. I'm Sam Bivens with the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board, standing in for Presiding Officer Kenzie this week. This is a hearing on the pending petition for assignment of state filed application 25517 and accompanying water right application 25517X01 and the pending request for release from priority of state filed applications 25513, 25514, 25517 unassigned portion 22235, 23780, and 23781 in favor of water right application 25517X01 of Sites Project Authority, and we'll be continuing the rebuttal proceeding in this case today. This hearing is being conducted by Zoom teleconference. It's also being broadcast live on the AHO YouTube channel. Both the audio and video of this hearing are being recorded, and we will post files of this recording in the FTP folder for this proceeding. The YouTube recording will also be available on the AHO YouTube webpage. If you experience technical difficulties trying to communicate with us or accessing Zoom today, please send an email to the site's email inbox at sites-wr-application@waterboards.ca.gov or to the AHO email inbox. AHO staff will be monitoring the email inbox. As usual, Ms. Mullen of the AHO will be handling the screen sharing of exhibits and moving along with slides. So if you're a witness, please simply ask Ms. Mullen to advance to the next slide when you're ready during your testimony. And attorneys, you can ask Ms. Mullen directly to please bring up a particular exhibit. As always, we will take breaks today as needed. We'll have a mid-morning break, lunch, and so on and so forth. As in the past, I'll be holding this hearing to a hard stop at 5 p.m., although I anticipate we'll probably end a little early today. We'll continue to carry over appearances. If there's anyone new who will be appearing today, please identify yourself for the record now. And as we proceed, please keep your microphone muted except when you're speaking so that we can minimize background noise. So on my agenda for the day is to start and complete the cross-examination of Dr. Smallwood, and then we'll hear from Mr. Buckley. I believe those are the only coordinating NGO witnesses available today. Is that correct, Mr. Mooney?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Once we've completed examinations of those witnesses, I intend to have a conversation with counsel to set a firm schedule for next week so that Ms. Kenzie doesn't have to deal with any surprises in terms of witness availability when she returns. And then after that, we will adjourn until, I believe, Monday. Anything else that should be on my agenda today, counsel? All right, with that, let's get Mr. Smallwood up on the screen, please. All right, good morning, Mr. Smallwood. Thanks for joining us again today. I'll just remind you that you remain under oath and testifying under penalty of perjury. And with that, Mr. Hitchings, I will turn the floor over to you to conduct your cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. Bivens. Good morning, Dr. Smallwood. Again, my name's Andrew Hitchings. I represent the Sites Project Authority in this proceeding. Thanks for being here today to answer our questions.
Good morning.
Ms. Mullen, could you please bring up Dr. Smallwood's testimony at FOR 344 and scroll to page 2? And if we could go down to lines 12 and 13. Here, Dr. Smallwood, you reference case in chief testimonies of Lisa Weber and Jennifer Hale as sites 113 and sites 114, respectively. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that both of those testimonies were corrected and corrected testimonies submitted?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
Are you aware that both of those testimonies had corrections made to them and both of those corrected testimonies were submitted?
I don't recall that, no.
So did you review those corrected testimonies in preparation for your rebuttal?
I don't recall doing that.
Okay. If we could go to pages 4 and 5, paragraph 6, Ms. Mullen. And Dr. Smallwood, in this paragraph, you described 6 types of different biological surveys. Is that correct?
See, I think there's 5 I described.
Well, you talk about reconnaissance survey, general biological survey, habitat assessment. Oh, I guess for reconnaissance survey and general biological, those are kind of the same thing, just different terms for them.
Correct.
Okay. Have you reviewed the construction ITP incidental take permit issued by CDFW for the project?
Yeah, I believe I did.
Are you aware that the construction ITP requires the surveys you describe in this paragraph subject to CDFW review prior to project construction?
I don't remember exactly.
And then on page 5, lines 1 to 4, if we could scroll there. Here, Dr. Smallwood, you assert that all of these surveys you describe, except for pre-construction surveys, are intended to precede the final EIR, EIS, and project approval, but you don't cite to any supporting authority at that location in your testimony, correct?
That's correct.
If we could also scroll to page 43 to lines 23 and 24. Dr. Smallwood, here you assert that, quote, only pre-construction take avoidance surveys serve as mitigation measures, end quote, but you don't cite to any supporting authority at that location in your testimony, correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware that the authority biological witness, Jennifer Hale, testified during rebuttal that it is commonplace for several types of biological surveys to be conducted after a project's approval pursuant to EIR mitigation requirements?
I'm aware she said that, yes.
Have you reviewed Ms. Hale's rebuttal testimony?
Yes.
And that's at sites 381? That's what you reviewed?
I don't remember the number.
Okay. Are you aware whether that same approach was taken by the High Speed Rail Authority when preparing its EIR, EIS documents for that project?
No.
Are you aware whether the Department of Water Resources also employed that approach when preparing the final EIR, EIS for the Delta Conveyance Project?
I don't remember that, no.
Are you aware that this practice of conducting surveys post-project approval is required mitigation under the final EIR/EIS for the sites project?
I am.
Are you aware that the final EIR/EIS, which includes its mitigation measures, was upheld by both the trial court and the appellate court in CEQA litigation challenging the sites project?
I'm not sure about the latter, but yeah, I suppose so.
Okay, if we could go back to page 4, lines 10 to 12. Dr. Smallwood, here you assert that the site's authority, quote, did not accurately estimate the baseline environmental setting and therefore did not accurately estimate impacts or propose adequate mitigation for those impacts. Do you see that?
I do.
Are you aware that both the trial court and the appellate court rejected Friends of the Rivers and their co-petitioners' challenges to the sites project final EIR specifically related to the environmental baseline for the project?
Well, I wasn't involved then, but I understand that was the case.
Okay, if we could go to page 6, lines 2 to 4. Dr. Smallwood, here you state that, quote, surveys to inform the public and decision makers of the composition of the local wildlife community have been lacking, or in some cases are non-existent. Do you see that?
Yes.
Do you consider CDFW to be a decision maker with regard to addressing wildlife impacts from the construction and operation of infrastructure projects?
In some respects, I suppose they are, but not in all.
Are you aware that CDFW received the final EIR, EIS, and the project's ITP application for its construction ITP and its operations ITP and has issued both construction and operations ITPs for the project?
Could you restate that? I'm not, kind of got lost.
Sure. Are you aware that CDFW received the final EIR, EIS, and the project's ITP applications for its ITPs for construction and operations, and in fact issued construction and operation ITPs for the project?
I'm sure they received the FEIR, FEIS. Some of the other stuff you mentioned, I don't know. And I think that I don't know if they issued any take permits.
Have you not seen the construction ITP permit issued by CDFW for the project?
I did. I saw that.
Have you seen the operations ITP issued by CDFW for the project?
I don't think so.
Is it normal practice for CDFW to receive an ITP application for a project before it issues an ITP for a project?
I don't know.
Okay. If we could scroll to, well, these questions are going to be with regard to paragraphs 10 through 19, and the heading for that section of your testimony is explanation for deficiency of surveys. And I think that's the reference to your testimony regarding the surveys performed by the Sites Project Authority, correct?
I'm sorry. You lost me on that one.
Does this section of your testimony in paragraphs 10 through 19 address your critique of the wildlife surveys performed by the Sites Project Authority and its consultants?
It addresses part of my critique.
And in this section, you question and criticize the practice of not performing all biological surveys except for pre-construction surveys prior to completion of the final EIR, EIS, and the project approval, correct?
Can I read this real quick?
Sure.
Okay, so can you repeat the question?
Sure. You assert that in this section of your testimony, you question and criticize the practice of not performing all biological surveys except for pre-construction surveys prior to completion of the final EIR, EIS, and project approval. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And specifically, maybe we could go to page 6, lines 12 to 13. I think we're on page 6, actually. Is that right? Yeah. So if you look at lines 12 to 13, you specifically assert that the authority's reasons for not performing some site surveys, like lack of site access and lack of authorization to survey private properties from public roadways, that they're not valid reasons. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware that the Colusa County representatives expressed concern to the site's authority about subjecting local residents to wildlife surveys of their properties, including any so-called over-the-fence surveys from public roadways?
I'm not aware of that.
Do you recommend that surveying private property from public roadways, even where local government officials have expressed concerns with doing so, is a good practice?
Yes. If you're going to take an entire valley, absolutely. Yes.
With those local concerns, having knowledge of them provided by local county officials, do you think that presents a risk of conflict between landowners and surveyors?
I'm gonna object in terms. Some of this is assuming facts that I don't think are in evidence.
Well,
Question.
I think that's fair.
I'm sorry, I
Also,
can't see who's speaking. Who's speaking?
So Mr. Mooney made an objection.
Donald Mooney.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Bivens, I didn't hear your
I'm
response.
I'm gonna sustain the objection. I think it's fair, but I think you can rephrase and get around that, Mr. Hitchings, if you feel you need to.
Well, I think, Dr. Small, you just said that even with local concerns expressed by local county officials with regard to conducting those surveys, that if I understood your testimony correct, you asserted they still should be performed.
Yes.
Do you think that that could present a risk of conflict between local landowners and the biologists performing the surveys?
Objection. Calls for speculation.
Overruled.
Could it cause conflict? I don't know. But if my county supervisors told me I could not survey a public road in my county, I would survey the public road if it was in the interest of wildlife.
Isn't it possible there could be personal safety issues for the site's consulting biologists to ignore those concerns and survey anyway?
There could be public safety issues anytime we do a survey anywhere. I certainly have experienced them. I've had people threaten to kill me. I've had people shoot at me. So I've been there. That's what we do. We take a risk with the professional biologists. We take a risk. We know that. We all do. When we go out and do a survey.
And that's even in the case where I think you just said where local county officials have indicated that those surveys are preferred to not take place.
It wouldn't matter to me. If I'm looking at wildlife resources that are at risk across a great area, to me, the imperative is to do the surveys.
Okay. Are you aware of the authorities' quote, respect for local communities' central value, as testified to by Kevin Spessert, the authority's external affairs manager, and by Mr. Jerry Brown, the authority's executive director?
No.
Would you agree that respecting the private property rights of local residents is an important aspect of pursuing a large infrastructure project?
I would think so, yes, within reason.
We could go to page 11, lines 16 to 18. Dr. Smallwood, here you assert that, quote, according to my understanding of the testimony of Ms. Weber and Ms. Hale, the Sites Project Authority instructed its biological consultants not to survey for biological resources on the project area. Is that correct?
Yes.
But here in your testimony, you don't cite to any specific testimony or transcripts that support those assertions, correct?
Well, not in this particular part of my testimony, but throughout my testimony, I do.
Dr. Small, would you make assertions related to your experience performing site surveys on other projects and compare that to your recommended approach for this project, correct?
Yes.
And if we could go to page 11, where we are, lines 20 to 22. You state, quote, had I been unable to gain access to private properties to survey for wildlife on project site, I would have surveyed from the periphery or from as close to the property as I could get, end quote. Is that correct?
Yes.
So if you worked for a client pursuing a large infrastructure project who confirmed that they did not have private property access to perform wildlife surveys and informed you they had a respect for local communities policy that was contrary to surveying private property from public roads, how would you address the need for wildlife surveys?
I would push hard for them. And if I was still not allowed to do them, I would have a choice. I could either quit the firm or I could do the best I could with existing information, but temper my conclusions accordingly. It's not, in other words, I would not make conclusions I could not support about impacts to wildlife.
So there would be some circumstances or situations where you actually would not conduct the surveys either because you didn't have private access or from public roadways, but you would otherwise use the data information available and qualify and clarify your conclusions appropriately. Is that correct?
Yes, in my experience as a professional biologist doing lots of surveys and assessments, I almost never get what I want in terms of access to the data I need. So I do the best I can, but it's important that I don't make conclusions that are unsupportable by the information I have. So the conclusions have to be supportable. And my operating principle is a precautionary principle when it comes to wildlife. So I'm not going to make any conclusions about a project not having impacts when I have no basis for that conclusion.
Okay, thank you. If we could go to page 13, paragraph 27. Here, Dr. Small, you discuss the September 15th, 2024 survey that was conducted by you and your daughter. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And this survey you describe, that was performed after you submitted your case in chief written testimony, but before you verbally testified earlier in this proceeding in October during the case in chief. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there a reason why you didn't mention this September 2024 survey during your prior verbal testimony?
Yeah, because I didn't enter it into evidence before.
Do you have the location coordinates for this survey that you could provide?
Yes, I have already provided them, actually. So I gave Don Mooney the coordinates of each of my survey sites, and I understand he passed them on to you. It's the southernmost survey site is where I did this survey.
So the survey coordinates, we had understood that those survey coordinates provided reference the locations of your 3 surveys that had been conducted prior to you submitting your case in chief testimony. Are you saying that you went back to one of the same locations for
Yes.
the survey conducted in September?
Yes.
And did you just say that was the southeasternmost location?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And this same page, if we could go down to paragraph 28, lines 18 to 20. Here you assert that you encountered some local travelers during your roadside surveys and that they did not express concerns and were polite. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did you verify that these people were landowners within the project footprint?
Yeah.
Did they indicate where they owned property?
Yeah. I talked to 2 of them at the property, and the other 2 were on their way to the house, which I could see from where I was surveying.
And they were within the project footprint?
Yeah, well, the ones in the extreme south, they probably will be just outside if they're along the shoreline. But the folks that have a house right next to where we're surveying, I think that they're going to be inundated. That would be my,
And
based on the most recent map I saw of the reservoir, my assumption is that they would be inundated.
so did any of those people confirm whether they own the property that you were viewing and surveying from the public roadway?
Well, the ones at the southernmost extent were working the property, so I assume they own it. I asked them if I can take a road. They went through the property and they said no. But they're very polite. They had no problem in being out there. They just said that road it's just their ranch road. So no. And the other
Okay.
couple, they said they're going to the house. So I assume they live there.
All right, if we could go to pages 13 and 14. So this paragraph 29 goes on to the next page. In this paragraph, you discuss your data collection results at 3 locations where you and your daughter surveyed. Is that correct?
Um, I don't think I said that here. Did he repeat?
I said in this paragraph, you discuss your data collection results at the 3 locations where you and your daughter surveyed.
Okay, yeah, I see
Is
that.
that correct?
Sure.
And then there on page 14, at lines 3 to 5, you assert that your collected data, quote, eliminated uncertainty over the occurrence likelihood of each species we detected and narrowed, quote, all of the sources of error and bias associated with habitat assessment, correct?
Yes.
Do you think that surveying at 3 roadway locations provides adequate information to describe the wildlife presence and habitat conditions for the 13,000 plus acres of land in the project footprint?
No.
On pages 14 to 17, Dr. Small, would you include a table listing species that you assert you and your daughter observed at some point during your roadside surveys, correct?
Yes.
And of the approximately, and maybe we could scroll down to that. I think it starts on bottom of 14. Yes, thank you. Of the approximately 70 species you list, 18 of them are identified with some special status designation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the table includes a column titled New on 15 September 2024 with the word yes included in the same row as 10 of the listed species, correct?
Yes.
So does this mean that these species were not observed by you and your daughter prior to your September 2024 survey?
Correct.
And 6 of those 10 newly observed species are identified as having some special status. Is that correct?
I don't remember. I don't see the list entirely, but I'm not sure.
Well, let's go down, and if we could maybe scroll through. So where we hit any that say new on, so there's 2 at lines 11 and 12. And BOP, I forget whether that's a special status designation.
Birds of prey.
Okay, and then if we could keep scrolling down to where there is a yes designation in the far right column. And if we could just keep scrolling through the So there's 5 on this page. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, 4 at the top. Are any of those special status designations?
So 2 of them are actually, yeah, I'd say 2 of them are questionable. WB, WGL, that's low. That's a judgment call, whether you want to call it special status. So I would say 4 are solid special status species out of the 10,
Okay.
and 2 of them are on the fence.
Okay, if we could go to page 18 in the second numbered paragraph. Well, it's 29. Maybe scroll to the top. And this is just for the record, there's a numbering issue. I think the paragraph that the table was contained in was also paragraph 29. So we're referring here to the second numbered 29 paragraph that starts on line 2, page 18. Here, Dr. Smallwood, you discussed the use of older survey data suggesting that older studies were not considered by Ms. Hale. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware that in Ms. Hale's corrected case-in-chief testimony at cites 114C, paragraph 8, she confirms that older survey information was reviewed for informational purposes and that all the species indicated in those older surveys were included in the final EIR/EIS impact analysis?
I know that she the first phrase you mentioned, I remember that from the original testimony. The second phrase, I'm not so sure. But I don't know if I saw her corrected version or not. Or maybe I just don't remember.
Okay. If we could go to page 20, paragraph 13. I'm sorry, paragraph 33. And here at line 17 to 18, you state that the site's biologist, quote, asserted that relying solely on aerial imagery is common practice for large projects, end quote. But you don't provide a citation to support this assertion at this place in your testimony, correct?
Yeah, it's just based on my experience.
But here you're stating that the site's biologist asserted that relying solely on aerial imagery is common practice. So what experience are you referring to?
I've reviewed hundreds of environmental reviews, and I can't remember this ever happening.
But you don't have a citation to where the site's biologist allegedly made that assertion that they relied solely on aerial imagery. Is that correct?
Oh, I see what you're saying, I think. No, I don't have a citation for it.
And then on lines 18 to 19, you state that the sole use of aerial imagery for assessing environmental impacts is not supported by industry norms. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that the final EIR/EIS biological resources analysis did not rely solely on aerial imagery?
Well, explain yourself. What did they rely on? They relied on habitat assessment.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
not here to answer your questions. I'm asking, are you aware that the final EIR/EIS biological resources analysis did not rely solely on aerial imagery to assess wildlife impacts.
I'm sorry, but the foundation of the entire analysis is based on aerial imagery interpretation. There are no
Okay, well,
surveys in 2020 or 2021, and those surveys didn't even factor into the FEIR, FEIS.
okay, well, you may have said that you did not review the corrected testimony, but at Ms. Hale's corrected testimony at page 3, line 16 to 18, she briefly described some of the methodology used, including the use of CN-DDB results, use of unofficial endangered and threatened species lists for the study area obtained by U.S. Fish and Wildlife, historical and recent aerial imagery of the study area, use of species distribution, habitat association, and habitat requirements information from numerous sources cited, and then the use of California Essential Habitat Connectivity Project and GIS habitat connectivity layers from 2018. Do you recall that list of items in her testimony?
I do, but those are not direct observations from the site. I've criticized those sorts of information in my testimony.
But those sources of information are above and beyond solely just using aerial imagery. Is that correct?
Not really. If you don't have any CNDDB records because people weren't doing surveys out there because they didn't have access, then you don't have any data. Really?
Well,
I mean,
I'm sorry, I thought you were
you're
finished.
not, I should be not so general in my statement. I mean, you're going to have very little data.
Well, do you dispute that the site's authority used those other information sources to assess wildlife impacts? And when I say other, beyond just aerial imagery?
I'm not disputing that, and I'm just saying those sorts of information are not reliable for this purpose. And furthermore, I have not seen any reporting of how those sort of information were actually used in developing a habitat model.
Okay, well, we'll get to that. We could go to page 22. Ms. Mullen, thank you. And you provide a figure 1 here, and you assert that this illustrates why it is, quote, not common or typical to forego wildlife surveys on large projects. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this figure did not appear in your case in chief testimony, correct?
Case in chief? You mean the original testimony?
Your prior written testimony.
No.
And what types of surveys are reflected in this figure?
Reconnaissance surveys.
Are any protocol level surveys included?
No.
And where did you get the survey data for this figure?
From my records of the surveys I've performed, the environmental reviews I've reviewed.
So these are all, I'm sorry, these are all from surveys that you performed for
No.
projects that you worked on?
These are all from projects I reviewed. I reviewed the environmental documents that are provided. So I've served as an expert witness hundreds of times, and I've kept track of what I was reviewing. Where they did surveys, what they found, etc.
Have your calculations supporting this figure been peer reviewed?
No.
And has the figure itself been peer reviewed?
No, but I did present at the Wildlife Society meeting last month.
But you didn't provide that for any advanced review by other experts in the field prior to presenting it at the conference you just mentioned?
No, and I don't think any of my testimony is ever peer reviewed before it goes into, before it's submitted.
Okay, if we could go to page 23, lines 6 to 7. Dr. Smallwood, here you state that habitat modeling results and assumptions need to be reported. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that the habitat modeling results were included? I'm sorry, habitat modeling methods were included in the final EIR EIS Appendix B titled Wildlife Habitat Models and Methods, and that's at AHO 323.
Yeah, I remember that.
Did you review it?
Yes.
And do you not agree that that appendix, or is it your assertion that that appendix does not describe the habitat modeling methods and assumptions used for the wildlife impact analysis?
Not well enough.
Okay, on this same page, lines 12 to 13, you state that Ms. Hale was, quote, limited to databases such as CNDDB, end quote, related to her review of species occurrences, correct?
Yes.
And then if we could just quickly go down to page 31. And then line 13, you have a section for this portion of your testimony that's with the header misuse of CNDBB. In this section, you essentially assert that Ms. Hale misuses the CNDDB by overly relying on it. Is that a fair characterization of that section?
Yes. Yes.
As we discussed, however, her testimony previously in cites 114C describes all those other sources of information that was reviewed for the wildlife assessment aside from just those CNDDB results, correct?
Yeah, but those other sources don't really have records. They don't have occurrence records.
But you don't dispute that those other sources of information were relied upon for the wildlife impact assessment, correct?
I don't really know because I don't see any explanation how they were used.
And you don't you didn't see an explanation in the appendix 10B AHO 323 that describes the habitat models and methods?
I don't remember those other sources being described or how they were used to develop any models in that appendix.
Okay, if we could go to page 32. And then lines 1 and 2. Here you state that both Ms. Weber and Ms. Hale rely on CNDDB occurrence records for modeling habitat of special status species of plants and wildlife. But here again, you don't provide any citation to support that claim there in your testimony, correct?
Not here, but I suspect I probably did elsewhere. And I use a lot of quotations in my testimony from what they actually said. So
Can you point to any evidence that the CNDDB occurrence records were used for modeling habitat for special status species of wildlife that could be impacted by the CITES project?
no,
Can you point to any evidence that the CNDDB occurrence records were used for modeling habitat for special status species of plants that could be impacted by the CITES project?
not offhand.
Are you aware of AHO 77, which is the final EIS wildlife chapter, and the description on page 10-8 of what information was used for modeling habitat?
I don't remember.
Well, let's pull up AHO 77 if we could. Thank you, Ms. Mullen. And I appreciate you having to jump from these different documents. And if we could go to PDF page 8. And if we could show that first full paragraph under the bullet point there. So Dr. Smallwood, the first paragraph here under the bullet point, that provides the summary description of the information used for the modeling habitat. Do you see that description?
I see the paragraph.
Do you, if you could just take a moment to review that.
Okay, I've read it.
Do you agree that that provides a summary description of the information used for the modeling habitat?
It's a summary, but it's pretty vague. How are the
And
habitat descriptions used?
do you see any reference to the use of CNDDB occurrence records in that description?
No.
Okay, if we could actually go back now, another document, Ms. Mullen, Dr. Smallwood's summary presentation slides, which are FOR 361. And if we could go to slide 4. In the first bullet point on this slide, it states that the ICF biologists used the CNDDB information inappropriately and suggests that if there were no CNDDB records for certain species in the project area, then those species were excluded from the impact analysis in the final EIR EIS. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes.
Are you aware that table 10A2 in appendix 10A of the final EIR EIS, which is at AHO 158, that identifies numerous species where there were no CNDDB recorded occurrences for those species, but those species are in fact evaluated in the FEIR EIS impact analysis?
I couldn't say.
Well, let's go to AHO 158 if we could. And thank you again, Ms. Mullen. And if we could go to PDF page 19. And scroll down to monarch butterfly, please. I think it's at the bottom. So in the far right column, the last line says no known occurrences reported in the CNDDB, and then it refers to the CDFW reference for that. Is that correct?
Yes.
So that's for monarch butterfly. If we could go to PDF page 20. And for Western bumblebee, if you could scroll down, there it says no known occurrences and cites to the CNDDB as referred to under the CDFW site. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if we could go to PDF page 23. And this is for Northern Harrier. Second sentence in the far right column, there are no CNDDB occurrences reported You see that?
I do.
And if we could go to PDF 24 for Northern Harrier, if you could scroll down a little. I'm sorry, for Golden Eagle, which is far right column. Again, it says there are no CNDDB occurrences.
I see that.
And if we could go to PDF 30 for Townsend's big-eared bat, same thing. There are no known occurrences reported within 5 miles of the study area. You see that in the far right column.
I do.
And then lastly, PDF 32. And for American Badger, I think it's down a little further. Again, reference to no known occurrences in the CNDDB reference site. Do you see that in the far right column?
I see that.
Okay, if we could now go to the wildlife chapter of the FEIS-EIR, which is AHO 77, Ms. Mullen. And if we could go to PDF pages 54 or page 54. So you see that this section of the wildlife analysis includes an impact analysis for monarch butterfly.
Yes.
And if we could go to PDF page 56 and scroll down if we could. I'm sorry, 57. And you see this is the beginning of the section in the impact analysis that references impact analysis for the Western bumblebee. You see that?
I do.
And if we could go to PDF page 89. And you see that this is the start of the impact analysis for the Northern Harrier. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if we go to PDF page 97. And scroll down, if you could, please. You see that this is the impact analysis, the start of that section for Golden Eagle. Is that correct?
Yes.
And if we could go to PDF page 129. And you see the impact analysis starting at the bottom includes the impact analysis for the Townsend big-eared bat. Is that correct?
Yes.
And lastly, if we go to PDF page 137. And if we could scroll down. And this is the start of the section of the impact analysis in the EIR for American Badger. Is that correct?
I see that.
So given that information that we just walked through, and apologize for doing that, but I think it was important to illustrate the point. And I'm talking about the analysis showing where it was indicated there were no CNDDB occurrence records, and the other document showing that an impact analysis was still performed in the final EIR-EIS. Given that, isn't your assertion in the first bullet point on slide 4 of your presentation incorrect?
Could you show me that bullet point again?
Sure. And that's in FOR 361, slide 4.
No, I don't think it's incorrect.
Well, I asked you whether earlier I asked you that this slide states that they used CNDDB information inappropriately, and that if there were no CNDDB records for certain species in the project area, then they were excluded from the impact analysis in the final EIR/EIS, and you said that was a fair characterization of what that bullet point states.
Okay, well, what I meant, I'm not sure what I was thinking. Maybe I misinterpreted your question. I'm not sure, but their species list is too short. Their specialized species list is too short, and the way that you get there is by screening the CNDDB records. So you do your desktop review, you look at the species that could be there, and then you rule out all the ones you think are not there. And then from there, you get a shorter list, which is table 10A in there. I can't remember the document name for it. AHO something, 158, I think. And that's how they come to that list. How else do they come to that list?
But you do agree that there were, we just walked through numerous examples where the CNDB records indicated no occurrence, yet the Sites Project Authority still reviewed potential impacts on those species where the CNDDB records indicated no occurrence.
Yes. And I wouldn't say it's not, I'm not saying it's 100% misuse of CNDDB, but I also would point out that those references to CNDDB in that table that you went down, those are typically used, and the way I interpret most of those was sort of a validation that their modeling is correct, that there's low to moderate potential for the species to occur, because look, there's no CNDDB records within 5 miles. That's how I interpret those citations of CNDDB. Otherwise, why would they be there?
Okay, thank you. If we could go back to Dr. Smallwood's written testimony, and that's HO 344. On page 24, paragraph 40, you referenced, and here we're at line 7, you referenced table 10A2 in the final EIR/EIS appendix and imply that the table admitted some specific details regarding blackbird habitat, correct?
Tricolor blackbird, yeah.
Yes. If we could again go to AHO 158. And to PDF page 28. And table 10A2 provides only general habitat descriptions, not the specific details you discuss. And that's made clear in the heading for column 4 of the table, which reads general habitat descriptions. Is that correct?
I have a chance to read it? Okay.
Sure.
All right. Can you scroll down a little bit more? Thank you. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Well, would you agree that this table does not describe all the specifics, and the heading for the table indicates that it's providing just a general habitat description? Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, if we could go back to Dr. Smallwood's testimony at 344, FOR 344. And if we could go to page 42 lines 23 to 27. And with regard to the analysis of impacts to burrowing owl, you assert that certain CDFW 2012 guidelines require that detection surveys be performed by sites, quote, prior to the public circulation of the EIR, EIS, and that as a result, the authority failed to implement those purported guidelines. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes,
And then you cite to CDFW 2012 as the reference for those asserted guidelines, correct?
yes.
And if we could go to page 44 of your testimony. According to the references listed on this page, if we could scroll down to capture the second reference. That reference to CDFW 2012, that's entitled, according to this reference listing, a staff report on burrowing owl mitigation, Sacramento, California, FOR 151. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And if we could pull up FOR 151. And so this is the 2012 CDFW reference, the staff report that you use for your citation and your testimony, correct?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, did CDFW ever formally promulgate any regulations that require burrowing owl detection surveys prior to public circulation of an EIR, EIS for a project that could potentially impact burrowing owls?
No.
So is that you don't know, or to your knowledge, they have not promulgated regulations to your knowledge?
You mean like requiring that these guidelines be implemented? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, or that pre-detection surveys are required under any such regulations prior to public circulation of the final EIR, EIS?
I don't know any particular regulations, but if you're going to follow the staff guidelines for surveys, then you need to do the surveys before completion of the EIR, EIS, because the point of doing the surveys, the habitat assessment and the breeding season surveys, or where they might be, is to inform how many owls are out there and provide an impact analysis.
But you do agree you're not aware of any regulations that formally require that have been formally adopted by CDFW. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Dr. Smallwood, at various places in your testimony, you assert that the project's biological analysis and modeling lacked peer review. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah.
Are you aware that the final EIR, Chapter 33, lists the cooperating, responsible, and trustee agencies that were consulted and coordinated with throughout the preparation of the final EIR, EIS?
I'm aware of that.
Are you aware that these agencies include CDFW, the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. EPA, and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation?
I'm aware of that.
And doesn't the review by independent agency biologists and other agency experts constitute a form of peer review?
It's a more of a industry review. It's not really a peer review. Unless particular reviewers are asked to review based on their expertise with a particular topic, it is not peer review.
So you don't view it as any form or type of peer review to have those expert consulting agencies review the work and provide input?
Like I said, it is a form of peer review, but it's not really scientific peer review.
Okay, thank you. And then on page 44, I'm sorry, Ms. Mullen, if we could go back to FOR 344, Dr. Smallwood's testimony. And if we go to page 44. Actually, I think if we go back to page 42, I think I have the miscite here. Well, I can't find the site, and maybe we can do this without pointing you to the specific line, but do you recall a statement in your testimony indicating that post-EIR EIS surveys, quote, would not have the benefit of peer review?
Yeah.
And
Or
then
something, I mean, you have to put that in context. The context is you want peer review before a decision's made, or before impact decisions are made. So even the biologists themselves, they're coming to conclusions, right? And you don't want them coming to conclusions about potential impacts without having first done the surveys well and having some form of peer review.
okay, well, are you aware that CDFW's construction ITP for the project requires CDFW to review all biological reports and surveys prepared for each project phase prior to authorization of construction?
I'm aware of that, but it cuts out the public from providing review. It's an exclusive arrangement between CDFW and Sites Authority, and it excludes the rest of us. So there's really no true peer review of the results.
So are you saying that the public has to have, are you saying that the public is part of the peer review? I thought it was the scientific community.
Well, under CEQA and NEPA, the public includes scientists who can provide review comments. We do it all the time. That is part of the process.
But again, it is a type.
The sequence of events here is cutting out the public from being able to perform that role. I mean, as I understand it, one of the main purposes of doing these reviews is to disclose potential impacts. And if the public doesn't get disclosure, then they can't really, there's no part they can play anymore, including the scientists who are peer reviewers or can play the role of peer reviewers in public comment.
Okay, let's move on to pages 34 and 36 of your testimony. Good start at 34. And Dr. Smallwood, under the heading of, quote, novel term for significance, starting here in your testimony, you dedicate approximately 2.5 pages of criticism of Ms. Hales and Ms. Weber's use of the terms unreasonably adverse and unreasonably adverse impacts to describe their opinions regarding the project impacts. Isn't that correct?
Well, I don't remember how many pages it is, but I do criticize it.
So let's just scroll down through pages 34 into 36. So that's all of 35. Approximately half of 36. Most of 34. So do you agree that those pages criticize the biologist's use of those terms I just mentioned?
I don't remember that all focuses on that particular issue, but whatever, how many pages it is, I don't know how many pages are focused on that particular issue, but.
Well, have you reviewed the June 5th, 2024 amended hearing notice for this proceeding, including the list of hearing issues that are to be addressed by the party's submission of evidence and testimony?
I don't remember.
Are you aware that in the section of the hearing notice discussing water availability, the notice explains that, quote, the board may subject an appropriation to terms and conditions to avoid unreasonable impacts on fish and wildlife or other in-stream beneficial uses?
I don't remember.
Are you aware that hearing issue number 3D, lower Roman numeral 5 states, quote, would the proposed appropriation cause unreasonable adverse impacts to water quality, fish, wildlife, or public trust resources?
I don't recall. I'm just responding to the testimony I reviewed.
So you were never asked to address this specific hearing issue when you submitted your case in chief testimony and your rebuttal testimony for this proceeding, is that correct?
I never asked. I was asked to respond to the testimony provided by the experts.
Well, in your case in chief testimony, were you ever asked to respond specifically to this hearing issue that states, would the proposed appropriation cause, quote, unreasonable adverse impacts to fish and wildlife?
I was given no specifics, just serve as the role of expert.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Let's see. DWR, will DWR have questions for Dr. Smallwood?
Thank you.
That was, sorry, Mr. Soderlund, I didn't, you said, I heard thank you, but I didn't hear.
Apologies. I do not. Voice is
thank-
out. Apologies. No question.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Soderlund. State water contractors, will you have questions for Dr. Smallwood?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Will the Bureau have questions for Dr. Smallwood?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Mooney, I'd like to take a 5-minute break and then turn this over to you for redirect. Will you have redirect for Dr. Smallwood?
I may have a little bit.
All right, very good. Let's take 5 minutes. We'll come back at 10:17 and we are off the record.
Thank you.
Ms. Quimby, are you ready to go back on the record?
Sure.
Great, thank you. All right, Mr. Mooney, do you have redirect for Mr. Doc? Oh, sorry. Do you have audio, Mr. Mooney? Mr. Mooney, can you hear me? Mr. Mooney, are you ready to proceed? Can anyone else hear me?
I can't.
I can. Mr. Mooney might need to log out and back in or something.
Let's someone could communicate with Mr. Mooney and ask him to log out and log back in and see if that solves his audio problem. That would be great. Actually, I have a chat, I think. Do we have a chat?
There you go. I can hear you now. I don't know if it was my ear pods or what, but
all right. Well, good. We're now on the same page and no harm, no foul. Are you ready to proceed with redirect for Dr. Smallwood?
yeah, I just have a couple of questions.
Great. Please proceed.
And Dr. Smallwood, you had Mr. Hitchings had asked you some questions about the surveying on private property when you did the road surveys. And you testified that you had some interactions with locals, correct?
Yes,
And you didn't have any you were treated with respect by those local individuals. Is that correct?
correct.
Okay. Um, and you asked and you were asked about the respect for private property rights when you about doing road surveys, correct?
Yes.
And what did you do while you did your road surveys? You and your daughter did the surveys from the road, not road surveys, the surveys from the road to respect private property rights.
Well, certainly don't cross the fence. Don't go on private property. Stay on the road. And when somebody presents themselves, let them know what we're doing. That's my standard practice. If I'm in a rural area, just the other day, I was in a rural area south of Davis, and I was next to two homes. They don't, people there don't know what I'm doing or who I am. So I hailed one of them. I saw somebody and I hailed him and brought him over and I told him what I was doing. And yet he was totally cool about it. He asked me about raptors and we had a little discussion. Then he went on his way. So
Okay.
I try to make contact and respect their space.
And in your experience, not doing or you testified that you have reviewed hundreds of environmental documents, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In your experience in the past, have you run across a situation where the agency has instructed its biologists to not do even the minimal surveys from roads?
No, never heard of that. In fact, Caltrans, when I worked for Caltrans, we had pre-survey meetings where Caltrans people told us that if we had any trouble, and we were asked to contact landowners and ask permission to access their properties respectfully. And if we had any trouble, they could back us up with eminent domain and get us on the property. And of course, we didn't want to do that. So we tried as hard as we could to just be polite and get access the nice way.
And in your experience with respecting private property rights, would be inundating a valley with water, would you consider that to be respectful of private property rights?
Objection, argumentative. You're on mute, Mr. Bivens.
Thank you. Sustained.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Mr. Hitchings, do you have any recross within the limited scope of that redirect?
Yes, thank you. Dr. Smallwood, did you say that you were out surveying property this morning?
No, the other day.
In that case, where you were performing that survey, had any local county officials expressed concern with regard to doing any survey for the project, surveys of private lands for the project that you were surveying?
No, I didn't hear from them.
And in any of those other surveys that you just said in your experience over all the surveys you've done, that you've never been instructed not to perform the survey, in any of those cases, any of those examples, had local county officials expressed concerns with that practice of surveying?
No, the closest I would say was the county of Glen. The supervisors invited me to a meeting near Willows, and they asked me to talk about mountain lions. I do mountain lion surveys all over California, a statewide survey. And they interrupted me about 10 minutes into my talk and told me I was not welcome to survey in their county. So that was as close as I would say to someone, officials telling me that I should not survey in their jurisdiction.
Okay, that's all I have. And I do want to thank you for your testimony today. I know we ended a little abruptly after my initial cross was done, but do appreciate your testimony and answering our questions.
Oh, likewise. Thank you. Very good.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Thank you, Dr. Smallwood, for your
I
time.
would like to respond. One quick redirect.
Sure, Mr. Mooney. Go ahead.
Do county official, when you do your surveys, do those county officials have jurisdiction or authority to prevent you from doing those surveys, road surveys?
No.
Thank you.
All right. With that,
Can I do a quick recross, Mr. Bivens?
No, Mr. Hitchings. I think we've exhausted this topic. Thank you.
You're probably right. Thank you.
Dr. Smallwood, thank you for your time and your testimony this morning. You are officially excused.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Mooney, are we ready to proceed with, is it Mr. or Dr. Buckley?
It's Dr. Buckley, I believe.
I do have a PhD, yes, thank you.
All right, very good. Dr. Buckley, I believe you have not yet testified in this proceeding, so let me find my oath, which I will administer, and then I will turn you over to Mr. Mooney. All right, Dr. Buckley, do you swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Mooney, you can proceed with Dr. Buckley's direct examination.
Could you please state your name for the record?
Yes, Mark Buckley.
And do you understand that you're under oath?
I do, yes.
And is Exhibit FOR 365 an accurate statement of your written testimony?
I believe so, yes.
And did you prepare that testimony?
I did.
And is Exhibit FOR 17, and no, I actually, wait, I wrote down the wrong number for your qualifications.
I think it's well, his testimony is 365.
I can pull it up.
Oh, do you need the one for my CV?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
364.
CV is FOR 364.
364 is FOR 36. Thank you. Is FOR 364 an accurate statement of your qualifications?
I believe so, yes. I know that I'm constantly working on projects, and it's not necessarily always completely current, but it is generally a complete list. Thanks.
And are exhibits FOR 366 to 370 true and correct copies of exhibits to your testimony and relied upon in your testimony?
I believe so, yes. I double checking this time, but yes, that sounds correct.
And is exhibit FOR 371 an accurate summary of your testimony?
Yes, it is.
And did you prepare that summary?
I did prepare that.
Okay, if you'd please summarize your testimony, and we'll ask Ms. Mullen to bring up FOR 371 on the screen.
Yes, thank you. So these are some slides I prepared to summarize my written testimony. We can proceed to the next slide. So my testimony focuses on the costs and affordability in the available information that was provided to me, and some of the implications for affordability that, in my opinion and from my experience working on domestic, municipal, and agricultural water supply projects all over the West, seem to be very important considerations and indicative of issues that can drive the feasibility and overall success of projects such as this. So I tried to evaluate the implications of the available information on both water supply and project costs, as well as trends on those costs, to consider where the affordability issues might likely arise and how they seem to compare relative to overall costs, and the suite of supply and cost issues that the potential participants would face. It does appear to me that the costs are increasing, certainly more rapidly than inflation alone would indicate, as well as the available supply that would be provided by sites relative to those generally fixed costs, which ultimately relate to some potential key challenges in terms of per acre foot costs when we look at declining supply availabilities, particularly in times when water demand would be greatest, while costs are also increasing in more of a general and capital-based sense. We can go to the next slide. So this relates to one of the key mission statements for the project of providing affordable water. That said, this affordability question doesn't appear, from my understanding, to be very comprehensively addressed or currently addressed, at least yet in terms of public materials available. That we've seen relatively high costs already when it comes to this water, especially considering the range of potential users and the high affordability challenges facing participants already. We see the $1,300 per acre foot cost estimates from 2021, and I haven't seen any updates to that calculation, even though there has been a series of other studies looking at overall project cost increases, as well as more recent availability of water study declines. So we can go to the next slide. A couple of the key factors driving this supply issue and potential severity of constraints on water available to deliver from sites are all issues that have been directly acknowledged and addressed, to my understanding, by the sites project, in terms of both climate change and how climate change is already increasing the severity, frequency, duration, and unpredictability of droughts and the availability of water that sites would be able to utilize. There's also the incidental take permit issue that has arisen more recently that has, to my understanding, indicated that there will be a reduced availability across all years for diversions, which further constrains those marginal opportunities for capture and storage of water. That's also indicative of general potential for both increasing ecological needs for in-stream flows for waterways that sites can affect, as well as the indication that sites should be providing these kinds of in-stream flow benefits and ecological benefits as well. So in summary here, I think we have many factors that are combining that will, in very high likelihood, continue to reduce the availability of water for sites to capture. So reducing that supply and overall volume, especially in droughts and especially at the later ends of multi-year droughts when that water would be most needed by participants. Next slide, please. As I also mentioned, that we're seeing the costs increasing for a number of factors. The combination of those issues are leading to very high potential costs per acre foot of water. And when we think about the costs being relatively fixed and the volume available to supply potentially dropping dramatically, especially late in droughts, we can imagine easily scenarios where that cost per acre foot substantially higher. Even if you were doing the calculations, I wouldn't be surprised if those calculations, again, which we don't have the data to conduct ourselves currently, rising above the range of thousands, even I wouldn't be surprised to see it into the tens of thousands of dollars. And participants will be bearing all of these costs. And I understand the overall financing funding strategy does require that full commitment. So those costs could be extremely high at some points. And I'm just not aware of information that participants have available to them right now to understand how high those per unit costs could potentially be. Next slide, please. And water affordability is an issue that is already a high priority for the state, and it's such a serious and growing issue in California that Congress and US EPA have all made statements on this, produced reports, and State Water Board similarly is taking this on as a very high priority issue, and we can see that individual communities that are within the regions that would be utilizing and responsible for the costs of sites water are facing high affordability challenges. And affordability is an increasing concern in communities, both as water costs go up for water supply and water quality issues, and as we understand the distributional effects of water rates, especially in the sense that they tend to be relatively regressive in that they aren't proportionate to ability to pay and household budgets, that we're increasingly understanding how high that burden is on the lower income, historically underserved communities. So there are important equity implications here at play. Next slide, please. So these all combine, these issues are combining to suggest that we're seeing decreasing water availability expectations for sites, increasing costs, and frankly, decreasing reliability, considering that the periods of time when water would be most important for these communities are also the time frames where the water is likely the least reliable. And I don't think that's a consistent theme across all water supply opportunities that communities face, that there are other options out there, while costly, if considered on the margin, particularly during those severe high drought time periods where I wouldn't be surprised if the affordability issues become more pronounced. I think is that my I think that's my final slide. So yes, that I think that's completes my summary statements. Thank you.
There we go. All right, thank you, Dr. Buckley. Mr. Ferguson, do you have cross-examination for Dr. Buckley?
I do.
All right, please proceed.
All right. Good morning, Dr. Buckley. My name is Aaron Ferguson. I'm an attorney for the Sites Project Authority. I'll be asking you some questions this morning about your rebuttal testimony. Okay?
Sure. Thanks.
I'd like to start with the statement you make on page 5 at lines 18 through 21 of your testimony. And particularly, you note that your testimony highlights the evidence of the high per acre foot costs sites will have, leading to increased unaffordability issues for participant communities and cost ineffectiveness. You see that language?
I'm sorry, I just pulled up my report. Could you
Yes.
again the particular line and page?
Sure. Yeah, so on page 5 at lines 18 through 21.
Yes, I see that.
Okay, great. In your testimony, Dr. Buckley, do you provide a definition of water affordability in order to make your conclusions?
I do not myself define an explicit definition, but I do reference several studies by the state of California and US EPA that go into extensive detail. And it is I'll say it's a complex and evolving definition. I do reference that process where I would say collectively that makes it difficult to put it into a single nutshell. And I do not believe that I make an attempt to summarize it in a complete definition in my report.
Well, to reach your conclusion that sites, may foresee, or that you're foreseeing potential increased unaffordability for the site's project, what standards from those studies were you using to reach that conclusion?
The key implications for affordability in this context generally relate to ratepayers and what household rates are expected to be and how those rates factor into household budgets. And there are some key benchmarks or rules of thumb that underlie most of these methods, sort of percent of median household income at a community scale. And I have not seen a full rate study applied for the participants in terms of what these added costs are for their rates, but I am inferring that based on my extensive experience working on this affordability issue, including directly for EPA's Office of Water. I've worked on several studies, both in terms of how the definitions are developed, but also developing tools at the state level and for communities to evaluate their affordability. So I'm very familiar with that process, and I have worked on affordability issues for communities in California and across the West. And I'm using some of the state's own materials where it shows that these communities are already facing affordability issues, meaning they have already passed those thresholds in terms of the various tests to look at how the rates relate to overall household budgets, distribution of income, and other expenses that households face, especially non-discretionary costs.
Okay.
And so I'm basing that on the level of costs that we're seeing and the expectation that those costs in a per acre foot sense, especially during limited supply drought conditions, would likely be very high and clearly above other current baseload water supply costs.
So more specifically, and I think you've said this to some extent, but more specifically, are you relying on any of the indicators in the state water board's drinking water needs and affordability assessment?
Generally, those factors and those analyses are an important part of that. And at this point, much of that affordability evaluation for a community is based on a suite of measures and factors. But yes, I am generally relying on those types of measures and analyses that are already available for these communities.
Okay, so the state water board's drinking water needs and affordability assessment relies on an MHI measure, or I think it's median household income measure, correct? to determine affordability. Are you familiar with that?
I am, yes, and that's usually the first line of that affordability evaluation. Yes.
Okay. And do you agree that that measure, in order to apply it, you need to know how a residential water bill may or may not change? You need residential water bill information, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, let me ask the question again. I asked you two questions there. In order to apply that MHI indicator, you need data on residential water bills, correct?
Yes, it's usually you're looking at a percent of the median household income as a portion of the affordability analysis. And to do that, yes, you need a designated population. You need a measure of median household income in that community. And then you need to look at what the total water costs are for these communities. And I'm assuming, based on the state's analyses and the dashboard materials that I've seen, that they've already done that analysis and demonstrated that it's above those thresholds. And so I'm inferring that any costs that would be even greater in a marginal sense would just push those affordability results to be even more unaffordable.
I'd like to focus on an assumption I believe you just made, which is that I think you said any costs that are greater would only lead to further unaffordability, essentially, correct? Is that what you just said? Essentially?
A key portion is marginal, that those per unit costs would be increasing. That's a key element that I recognize, that as overall supply, population growth, a variety of factors, we'll see costs increase. But I think if we see costs increasing faster than supply would correspondingly increase, that's where that per unit cost and ultimately some translation into higher per unit bills for households would lead to those affordability issues.
Isn't a household bill reflective of a number of costs that a purveyor faces and then attempts to recover on through its bills?
Yes, that's correct. And that's why I didn't have sufficient information to make provide an opinion on how those bills would change in terms of specific amount.
Is it fair to say that the site's water supply could very well be one of many supplies in a portfolio of a water purveyor?
Yes, I fully assume that it would only be a portion of the supply. That's correct.
And is it possible that site's water may be less than the cost of current supplies that some sites participants have right now?
Yes, it's certainly possible that in certain years and wet years and high supply availability years for some of these communities, that it might not be the highest marginal cost supply source they use.
So we can't necessarily assume that the cost of sites water will increase a water bill in these communities where you're evaluating affordability, correct?
I think that is too much of an assumption, in my opinion. I do think that we are observing and experiencing sufficient drought conditions and increasing drought conditions that, given my understanding of the commitments participants must make, and considering how that rate calculation, and I have done rate studies, I understand how we have to think about the full capital, the full operation and maintenance expenses out into the future, and then build those into rates in a way that avoids big fluctuations. You can't have your rates go up in drought years and back down in wet years. That my understanding of the potential severity of those costs relative to the water supplied, it seems very likely that sites on the margin would force increased rates over time as those costs accrue and as the available water seems likely to potentially decline under some years.
You understand that the current sites participant list contains a variety of types of entities throughout the state, correct?
I do understand that, yes.
And you understand that each of those water purveyors has, unique supply and demand situations, correct?
I do, yes.
And do you agree that in order to assess affordability within each of those service areas, you need a fairly specific analysis of a number of these factors within each of those service areas, correct?
Yes, realistically, each participant agency or institution would need to conduct that, or we do them comprehensively. For example, I've done this for King County, Washington, where we have 34 separate component agencies that are being served, and we do calculate different median household income and other factors, as well as the full suite of their rates and costs for each community. And so you do come up with a different result. So I would assume variation across those participants here as well in terms of affordability results.
Okay. And just to confirm, you haven't attempted any such more specific analysis with respect to the current list of sites participants in terms of assessing affordability within their service areas. Is that correct?
That's correct. I think the implication of my evaluation analysis is that this is an important issue, an increasing issue. And from my review of information that was provided to me and that I found, I don't find sufficient information for those communities to already know what that is, and that it's something that sites and its potential participants should be looking at in a more comprehensive and complete way.
In paragraph 19 of your testimony, Dr. Buckley, on page 11, you explain that affordability calculations consider cost to households for water quality and water supply expenses, correct?
Yes, we generally in the formal methodologies that EPA has adopted, and to my understanding, states like California generally follow as well. We do look at the overall cost, and I raise that because I know these communities are also facing increasing water quality costs. I've done work for San Diego, City of San Diego, San Diego County, Orange County, other communities, and I know how those how their water quality in terms of stormwater, wastewater, sewer bills are also increasing, and again, increasing faster than inflation because of various factors like land costs, increasing regulatory compliance costs as rules under the Clean Water Act go into place, TMDLs, et cetera, that there are many factors that are contributing. And I realize those are outside of the control of sites, but they contribute to these affordability issues on the margin increasing for these communities.
Okay. Well, the cost categories and the drivers you mentioned in paragraph 19, they don't necessarily make water unaffordable for a household or business, correct?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understand that. Could you please restate?
Sure. Yeah, you identified a series of kind of cost drivers within those categories in paragraph 19 for water, correct?
Yes, it's certainly not a complete list, but sort of highlighting key factors, yes.
And then you conclude in the last couple sentences that these factors combine for particularly unaffordable water expenses for California households and businesses, correct?
I do, yes.
So I'm focusing on your conclusion that these factors lead to unaffordable water expenses for households and businesses. And I'm asking you, these do you agree that these cost drivers don't necessarily lead to unaffordable water expenses for California households and businesses?
Well, I'm referencing and sort of laying some of the groundwork for my next paragraph, 20, where I highlight and reference in my figure 1 the numerous communities around the state where there has been unaffordability measured and identified these high medium burden affordability communities. So I'm speaking about the general trends that are contributing to this current condition of high and increasing unaffordability. Because if you look at trends, and I recognize I can't recall if I directly provide that, but I know these studies certainly talk about the trends, that those are some of the key factors driving these trends in increasing unaffordability for water in communities, especially California.
Okay. And yeah, I guess where we started our conversation was more around the issues in the next paragraph when we, with respect to affordability. So I appreciate you explaining paragraph 19 and how it relates to paragraph 20. In any event, you do agree that you kind of need to take that next step to apply the affordability indicators using some of the cost information that you're discussing in paragraph 19, right?
Yes, exactly. That's the key here, is that we should be looking at sites from a more decomposed consideration of affordability in the way that affordability is defined and analyzed by the state and EPA at that household level, as you've highlighted.
In paragraph 21, you state that costs of goods are important relative to the value of the good provided, and that water supply options are not all equivalent in terms of value, correct?
Yes.
And then you note that important values include reliability and social costs associated with environmental degradation and increased vulnerability of socially valued species and habitat, correct?
Yes.
Do you agree that the estimated cost per acre foot for sites water reflects reliability of the site's supply?
I don't know if I could personally say that. I don't feel that I've seen an analysis that looks at, for example, one way to do this would be to consider what that cost per acre foot would look like under different years. If I saw, for example, a study that showed some forecasts of future scenarios based on current climate trends and looked at what participants could expect in terms of both the cost per acre foot, but the volume of water that's available. My understanding is that there are several factors constraining the supply availability, which if there's less water available in the years when it's most needed, that certainly is a reliability issue, in my opinion.
Was it your understanding that the modeling for sites has shown, the hydrologic modeling for sites has shown the potential for a certain average deliveries across a variety of water year types? Are you familiar with some of that modeling?
I'm not a hydrologist, but I am familiar with some of that work. I know there was one study in particular that I reviewed and referenced, particularly the one that was conducted, I believe, after the incidental take permit policy implications. But yes, I'm aware of a general body of work.
Okay. Do you agree that a report like the one you reviewed and then the more general body of work um, is is evidence of the reliability of the site's supply?
I don't in particular because I've worked on enough of these water projects, especially when we're talking about reservoir storage, where I've seen issues with that multi-year drought and both the issues for storage over multiple years, not to mention evaporation and other factors that would play into it. But my review of those studies talks about how much water can be diverted under which kinds of years. And I haven't seen sort of a comprehensive study looking at future scenarios. And I'm familiar with those studies in other contexts where we look at under what kinds of conditions water would be available to deliver versus which ones they would not. Like, for example, if that body of work started to look at what are those thresholds where we would not be able to deliver water, how many years in a row without the availability for diversions and storage before we hit a point where we wouldn't be able to deliver, and then could evaluate how likely are those kinds of drought conditions. So I recognize those studies that exist are important and valuable and contribute to understanding reliability, but they don't seem to be a complete evaluation, especially in the context of droughts when those projects are most important. And having done these kinds of benefit cost studies for Bureau of Reclamation myself, I know that the benefit cost calculation is most critical under evaluation of the drought years and the severity of those drought years. And for example, my work for reclamation in Washington State, most of the water projects that are moving forward there are based very heavily on an adverse climate scenario and their ability to deliver water under those adverse climate scenarios, as opposed to an average availability that you reference.
Are you familiar with the calcium hydrologic modeling that CITES has conducted for the project?
I am familiar with the calcium model.
Are you aware that the calcium model uses an 82-year period of hydrology in order to evaluate a number of hydrologic factors?
I don't disagree with that. I'm generally aware of that. I also recognize, again, I'm not a hydrologist, but I understand that hydrologists in California tend to disagree over what is an appropriate historic time frame that's representative of likely future conditions.
Could I just interject and ask clarification as to the version of the calcium model Mr. Ferguson's referring to?
Well, it would be the one for the historic for the final EIR. That's one version. I think he answered the question, and we don't need to probe this anymore, I don't think. So I just want to ask the other values you mentioned here of environmental degradation and increased vulnerability of socially valued species. Do you agree that the estimated cost per acre foot for site's water reflects those values as well?
No, I would not. And the reason I did not do a comprehensive analysis by any means of the overall social costs of the sites project, but my understanding from work done by other experts is that there are likely implications of water diversions for these ecological impacts, fish and wildlife impacts that I know are important to the public. I know salmon, for example, has all kinds of ecological, commercial, cultural values. And if there is evidence that sites would have greater negative impacts on those other valuable goods and services, non-market goods and services, those should also be considered by the public and by participants when evaluating trade-offs between their supply opportunities. And I assume, and I feel it's a relatively safe assumption that there hasn't been any effort to incorporate those costs into the cost that participants would pay. And obviously it's a very different financial calculation that you're not asking the participants here to pay those. But ultimately, when it comes to environmental compliance, and I think that's what the ITP reflects. The ITP, for example, is a signal that these are issues that are important to the public, but by no means is that a cost that's fully incorporated, internalized to these marginal cost estimates.
That's why I'm glad you brought up the ITP, because I was going to ask you about how these regulatory processes and whether these regulatory processes ultimately have an impact on the cost for sites water and the costs in particular that the sites project has stated. To the extent that the regulatory processes either impose mitigation in order to protect species and habitat, or they reduce the water supply available through certain limitations on diversion, for example, that results in a cost, correct? That would ultimately be transferred into the cost per unit of water. Is that correct?
Yes, I would agree that if regulatory mitigation is complete and able to fully avoid any negative environmental or ecological consequences, and those mitigation factors are all fully incorporated, internalized into the cost of sites, and those costs are translated to participants, they will see that, and it would be included, as you say. Again, I'm not a biologist, so I don't have an opinion on whether the mitigation is sufficient, but my understanding from a very general awareness, and I'm not referencing any particular area of expertise, that if those cannot all be addressed, those are additional costs. And in general, the same as with the affordability, the cost side, that this should be comprehensively considered. I think participants should be considering those comprehensive non-market, non-financial costs to society as well.
It sounds like you do agree that there is I'll just call it a market component related to those costs, to the extent that they're transferred through again reductions in available water or increased mitigation costs, correct?
Yes, generally, yes.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about a few of your statements related to state and federal participation and how that could affect, I guess, affordability.
Yes.
On page, excuse me, page 8. You suggest that there's a potential for reduced participation by the state and federal government. Is that generally correct?
Again, I have a very high level understanding in the publicly available material about the federal and state commitments, and I recognize that those commitments are evolving over time, and so it's obviously not practical to put a precise estimate on what those contributions would be. But from my understanding, there are potential budget constraints and thresholds for participation, which would matter in the context of if overall project costs are increasing and participants in general are responsible for their share, their percentage of costs. If some participants, in this case, state or federal, have relatively fixed contributions, if the overall costs increase, their share of costs could potentially would decrease under that scenario. So there's an uncertainty I wanted to highlight there, as opposed to a precise calculation of how that translates through to those ratepayer effects we discussed.
I think I'm just focused on your statement regarding reduced participation as a share of costs. And I understand you may have been making these statements with respect to what you read in the 2023 draft plan of finance. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, do you agree that there's no indication that the state itself would be reducing its participation? And maybe, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
I guess my understanding was that there are potential fixed amounts of funding potentially available from the state, and that funding contribution wouldn't necessarily be fully flexible and responsive with increasing overall project costs.
Yeah, so your understanding is that the state's financial contribution right now is fixed based on another process that resulted in state funding, the WISIP process. Is that your understanding?
That's generally correct.
Okay, and so your understanding is that if their share of the state share of the total costs may go down if the total project costs go up, because they're not going to contribute any more funding than the funding that's already been allocated through the WISIP process.
I realize those contributions are not fully defined in perpetuity. That all I was highlighting is that potential uncertainty and recognition of how state and federal allocations in the future are not bound in the same way that participants would be in terms of a full commitment to a percentage of overall cost. That's my understanding.
Well, what evidence do you have that the state's share of funding is uncertain? I think that's the way you just described it.
I guess my basis is from, again, a relatively high level understanding of the role that the state's funding plays versus the participants and the commitments.
But the relative relationship between the state and the other participants doesn't have an effect on the certainty of the state's contribution, does it?
Again, I'm just reflecting on what I've observed over time and how funding availability in the future that requires a state budget process can be unreliable, and purely highlighting the potential of that being another factor that would increase the per unit costs that participants would face. But you're correct. I don't have evidence that the state or federal commitments have stopped or would stop or decline in any kind of certain sense.
Okay. And when you refer to the federal commitment, you're referring to the Bureau of Reclamation's commitment. Is that accurate?
I am in general, but I recognize there could be other sources of federal funds as well. I recognize, like, the WIFIA loans, for example, are to some extent a federal contribution, to the extent that's relying on those subsidized loans that are generally federally backed.
Okay, well, I mentioned Bureau of Reclamation because you mentioned the Bureau in your paragraph 15, and I just wanted to confirm that your testimony is that you don't have any evidence specifically that there's some uncertainty with respect to the Reclamation's continued participation in the project. Is that fair?
Only reflecting the general sort of uncertainty with federal commitments for funding and spending that we're observing in general, especially under the current administration.
Okay. But you're not aware of any evidence of uncertainty specifically with respect to federal funding commitments for the sites project?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. Dr. Buckley, there are a few places in your testimony where you state that climate change will reduce or continue to reduce water availability. Is that accurate?
Again, I'm not a hydrologist and I'm not a climate scientist, so I'm relying on statements by others from the sites project and other experts that have indicated that these trends attributable to climate change for California are increasing severity, frequency, duration of droughts, and general uncertainty of hydrologic conditions in the state.
Okay. In preparing your testimony, I understand that you looked at Mr. Walker's submittal from December 13th, 2024. Is that accurate?
It is, yes.
Did you happen to review the testimony of Chad Whittington, another authority witness that was submitted at the same time?
Sorry, I can't recall that in particular.
Okay, can we bring up sites 306, please? I think it's actually sites 306C. Thank you. Well, let me just ask you while we're bringing that up. I understand on page 9 as well, Dr. Buckley, you also state that climate effects don't factor into the authority's assessment of potential diversions. Is that a fair statement of your testimony?
Which line are you?
Yeah, page 9, lines 21 and 22.
Well, I've referenced then in the rest of that sentence that spills to the next page, other than effects that have already been observed, because my understanding is that the study, again, I'm not a hydrologist, but my understanding is that it's based on historic conditions and not necessarily projections of future conditions that might be more severe in terms of droughts than we've observed in recent years.
Okay. Okay, well, I'd like to look at a few passages in Mr. Whittington's testimony, which is sites 306C. And if we can scroll down to, well, first of all, I'll just confirm. Does this testimony look familiar to you, Dr. Buckley? Can we scroll down a little bit, please?
I don't think I've seen this.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen this.
Okay. So if we can scroll down to page 2. And I'd like you to, well, perhaps read, can we scroll down further to paragraph 3? And please let me know if you need a minute to read through paragraph 3. But
And sorry, would you mind clicking that X to close the blue box?
yes, thank you.
Yeah, no worries, thanks. Okay. So read paragraph 3 here, starting at line 13.
Well, let me just ask you, do you see in paragraph 3 where Mr. Whittington describes a calcim modeling conducted for the ITP application?
Can the witness have the time to read the full paragraph, please?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, I've read that paragraph 3.
You're muted, Mr. Ferguson.
Excuse me. Dr. Buckley, based on your reading of this paragraph 3, is it your understanding that Mr. Whittington's calcium analysis described here accounts for climate change and future climate effects?
This paragraph does suggest that, and again, I'm not a climate scientist, and I don't know exactly what went into this analysis, but it seems that he's suggesting that there are some climate factors that have been incorporated into the calcium model, into this calcium 2.
Okay. Can we turn to page 11, please? And yeah, in this section, Mr. Whittington, and please take the time to read as much of it as you want once I ask you questions or before, but I'll just represent to you in this section, Mr. Whittington presents the results of modeling under a number of no action and project alternative scenarios. So if we can scroll down to page, or excuse me, the bottom of this page, line 25. And the last sentence in particular is the sentence I'd like to ask you some questions about, but I'll just read it briefly. It says, in considering the combined effect of future climate change and different reclamation participation levels, average annual sites diversions are 6% greater in the long term in the ITPA alternative 3B than in the final EIR EIS. Do you see that?
Could you scroll up to the next page where that spilled over to? And I'm sorry, ITPA, is that the incidental, is that refer to incidental take permit alternative?
Application, yes.
Yeah. And is this okay, yeah, I've read the paragraph now. Thank you.
Okay. And is it and perhaps we can go back up to the prior page, please. 11 at the top. And do you see where Mr. Whittington describes the Alt 3B scenario and some of the assumptions that are contained within it?
I do see that, yes.
So is it your understanding that the Alt 3B scenario considered climate change and climate effects?
You know, this is the first time I've seen this, and I can't know precisely how this was used or what was incorporated, but I agree that it does reference climate change related factors that have been included in some of these alternatives, yes.
Okay. And you see there where it says Alt 3 historic final EIR EIS, the middle bullet?
I do see where it says historic.
Yeah, so is it your understanding that that scenario used historic hydrology, and then that's what was used for the final EIR EIS?
Objection. That kind of calls for some speculation in terms of, I mean, he's got one paragraph and hasn't had a chance to review other parts of the final EIR EIS.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to sustain the objection. I think that's fair.
Okay. Can we go back down to the bottom of the page? The sentence that we previously read, Dr. Buckley, that starts on line 25 and carries over to the next page, is it your understanding of that sentence that it's explaining that diversions under a climate change calcium model scenario were greater than the diversions under the historic calcium modeling scenario?
Again, Same objection. I mean, he's asking him to, he's out, if I may continue, he's asking him to comment on modeling that in testimony that the witness had said he wasn't aware, he wasn't aware of the test, hadn't reviewed the testimony previous and the modeling. And he's not a climate
But
scientist.
yeah, I'm going to sustain the objection. I think we've established that Mr. Buckley hasn't reviewed this document. Let's move on to this one, please, Mr. Ferguson.
Okay. Just a few more questions, Dr. Buckley. Have you, in your experience, provided economic analysis for a client that's advocating for a water storage project similar to sites?
Have I provided economic analysis of that sort?
Yes.
I have provided economic analysis in evaluation of the benefits and costs of water storage projects and water supply projects many times.
And have you typically done that for clients that are opposed to those types of projects?
To talk through some of the largest ones, I've done many in Washington State that were jointly for Bureau of Reclamation and the state of Washington. I've done them also for the state of Washington specifically. I've done them for the state of Oregon, and I've done them for irrigation districts specifically. Probably all of my largest studies have either been for state or federal agencies or in coordination with irrigation districts.
So it sounds like those entities perhaps were proponents of projects.
They were proponents of addressing water scarcity. And at times we have had projects that we identified what the per unit cost would be, and then they didn't proceed, or they'd have to be reevaluated and redesigned to see if there were opportunities to reduce the costs, and certainly projects that haven't proceeded. But they're generally, I would say, trying to address water scarcity issues.
That's all the questions I have, Dr. Buckley. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Will Department of Water Resources have questions for Dr. Buckley?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soderlund. Will State Water Contractors have questions for Dr. Buckley?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mandel-Rice. And Ms. Mitchell, will the Bureau of Reclamation have questions for Dr. Buckley?
I do not have questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I actually have some questions for Dr. Buckley, so I'll ask them now, and then I'll turn this back over to Mr. Mooney for redirect. And Dr. Buckley, thank you very much for being here and your time and indulging me. I guess I'm going to ask you some, we'll call them conceptual questions that I'm interested in. So I guess first of all, you talked a little bit in your testimony on cross-examination about and I think this is in paragraph 21, the potential added social costs associated with environmental degradation and increased vulnerability of socially valued species and habitat, including salmon. And I guess I'm just curious, in your opinion as an environmental economist, how should the State Water Board go about evaluating those costs and, balancing them against the potential benefits of the project?
Yes, no, thanks. That's a great question. I'll say that most of my work is in a federal or state agency context that is generally trying to abide by federal guidelines for economic analysis. OMB provides very comprehensive guidance to federal agencies in Circular A4 and Circular A94 on these, and then agencies tend to translate those general guidelines for economic analysis to agency or department specific. And US EPA in particular has very useful and comprehensive guidance. And I say that in the context that a key principle across those is encouraging for this kind of context for sort of explicitly for public investment, should consider all the costs and all the benefits and do the best feasible job you can identifying what all of those costs and benefits are, including non-market. And if we're looking at general public preferences for environmental health, public health, public amenities, use and passive use values of things like salmon and other important species, that we should try to understand the incremental implications in terms of, first of all, what would the effects be of any particular project relative to baseline future conditions or relative to other alternatives, and then use available information to understand how that value relates to other costs and benefits. So oftentimes we do have to try to monetize those values. And in many of these circumstances, the water projects I described up in Washington State, for example, Bureau of Reclamation and State of Washington did have us quantify changes in salmon populations and measure both recreational commercial values as well as existence values based on household willingness to pay, stated preference values, that we were relying on studies conducted by NOAA and Washington Department of Ecology, but there are similar studies in California. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Department of Interior conducted such stated preference studies for salmon in the run-up to the Klamath Dam removals. So those kinds of studies have been done by federal agencies in the state of California. And work that I reference on water quality in Southern California, we did that as well, identifying market and non-market benefits, including things like recreation values. So to answer your, I know I'm taking a roundabout way to get there, but
good.
I would say there are good federal guidelines on how to do this, and there are good examples of how to do this. And in general, that guidance suggests we want to look at what the differences are across scenarios. And then first of all, try to quantify those differences, say in effect on quality or quantity of recreation opportunities, commercial effects, and existence values translated from changes, for example, in salmon populations that would be expected. And then look at the ways we can understand the monetary values associated. So first of all, you would need to understand what those expected effects would be on valuable public resources like in-stream aquatic conditions and fish and wildlife populations that rely on them.
Okay, thank you for that. So just a couple of follow-up questions on that point. Are you aware of any of the types of studies that you referenced being submitted as evidence in this proceeding?
I haven't been provided, and I have not personally seen any studies evaluating the benefits and costs from that economic perspective. But I'd be happy to review them if there are any available that I have missed.
That's okay. I'll leave that for someone else to follow up on if they want. But you talked a little bit about the public funding process through the state of California and through the federal government for this project. And I'm just curious if you're aware of whether the types of studies that you referenced in your answer to my initial question were performed in connection with those types of processes.
I haven't seen any myself, but I'm aware that those kinds of studies have been performed, and I have conducted those myself in other contexts, but I haven't seen them here.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Buckley. And then I guess just another sort of overarching conceptual question, and so why aren't well, actually, I'll ask it this way: is it your opinion, as expressed in your testimony, that the site's project participants, who have some financial skin in the game, and at least to my view, probably are the ones who ultimately have to answer to their customers on issues of affordability, aren't in the best position to evaluate the affordability of the project?
I don't want to speculate on what kinds of studies they might have been doing on their own or what other kinds of materials they might have available. But from my review, when we're looking at average costs and average water availability, in my experience, this kind of project is most critical in those non-average conditions, in those water scarcity conditions. And I haven't seen an evaluation of what the cost would be in those periods. And I certainly haven't seen any rate studies to evaluate the implications for household rates or business rates or cost for irrigators under those kinds of conditions.
Okay, that's fair, but you're not suggesting that the site's project participants, for example, don't have access to the information that they need to evaluate those types of factors, are you?
Well, I don't know if there's sufficient water availability information under future conditions, especially since the ITP, but they could, and they might be doing their own studies. But I also, having worked in this kind of context, I wouldn't be surprised if the large, sophisticated, well-resourced organizations, institutions are able to do that. But I also am very aware, having developed these kinds of affordability tools for EPA to assist small communities, that I know small communities don't really have the ability to do that kind of analysis themselves frequently.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Buckley. And then I guess I want to get to one more kind of specific kind of overarching conceptual / policy question. And I need to lay a little foundation to do that. So please don't take this as condescending. You're obviously very experienced, but I mean, do you have a general understanding of what the state water board's role is in this particular proceeding that we're all in today?
At a high level, I will admit I have not been working on this site's project, so I haven't been tracking it closely.
Fair enough. And so you can answer and I think this is my last question, and you can answer this with all the caveats you need. But in your opinion, as an economist, is this type of proceeding the best way to address the affordability concerns that you've raised in your testimony?
I would say that making all of the information available in a way that's accessible to participants is important. And if this is the most effective, transparent way to do that, it does feel like a very viable opportunity to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for Dr. Buckley. So what I would propose is I'll turn this over to Mr. Mooney for redirect, and then Mr. Ferguson will have a chance to recross. And Mr. Ferguson, you'll have that opportunity to follow up on my questions if that was fairly extensive. You can follow up on those and recross if you feel the need. So Mr. Mooney, with that, I will turn this witness over to you for redirect.
And I have no redirect.
All right. Mr. Ferguson, do you want to follow up on any of my questions for Dr. Buckley?
I do. Yeah, I do have a couple questions, and it relates to participant involvement in the
Go
science
ahead.
project.
Go ahead.
Dr. Buckley, do you agree that the existing commitments from the participants that are described in the draft plan of finance, which is one of the exhibits you reviewed, are evidence that the participants believe that the site's project is affordable?
I agree that it is an indicator under their willingness, under the information that they would have had available at their time of those commitments.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. All right, Mr. Mooney, do you?
No, I have no.
All right, very good. Then with that, Dr. Buckley, thank you very much for your time and testimony and for indulging my the amateur questions. And with that, you are excused.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that does it for the witnesses who are available today. Does it not, Mr. Mooney?
Yes, it does. And
Okay, well then let's take one more 5-minute break and then we will come back and talk briefly about scheduling for next week and any other housekeeping items, and then I think we will adjourn for the day. So we are off the record. We will be back on the record at 11:45. Thank you.
Well, could I ask your indulgence for a 10-minute break just because of something I need to take care of, if that's all right?
I will indulge the request for a 10-minute break. We will be
Thank you
back
very
at
much.
50. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Quimby, are you ready to go back on the record? I see you nodding, so I will take that as assent. We are back on the record here at 11:50. And before we adjourn, as I mentioned, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about schedule for next week. So by my count, from the coordinating NGO parties, we need to hear from Mark Easter, Chris Schutz, John Rosenfield, and Crystal Moreno next week. And then after we complete those witnesses, I believe the only remaining witness is Mr. King from T&M King Farms. Do I have the lay of the land correct?
I believe
think
that's right.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Great, thank you. So, Mr. Mooney, of your four, or I guess they may not all be yours, but of the four remaining coordinating NGO witnesses, who is going to be available and when?
Well, on Monday, Easter, Schutz, and Rosenfeld will be available. We expect Ms. Marino to be available, but we have not, from what we heard yesterday, we expect her to be available on Monday. I just checked to see if we'd heard anything else from her. We haven't, but if anything changes that she's not available Monday, or then we'll certainly let the parties know.
Okay, and then are you imagining, I think kind of what you mentioned is your standard expectation. You're imagining about 20 minutes of direct summary testimony from each of those witnesses?
Yes.
Okay, and then Mr. Hitchings and team, do you have an estimate for cross-examination for each of those witnesses?
Yes, we have about 45 minutes for Mr. Easter, maybe a little over an hour for Mr. Schutz, about an hour for Dr. Rosenfield, and about 45 minutes to an hour for Ms. Marino.
Okay, and how about Department of Water Resources? Do you anticipate having cross-examination for any of those four witnesses? And if so, rough estimate as to how much?
Still working it out a little bit, but I assume very minimal, like a few cleanup questions from my end, at most.
For each of the witnesses, you're
Mr. Schutz and Dr. Rosenfeld.
Okay. And state water contractors, do you anticipate having cross-examination for those four witnesses? And if so, I'll take a rough estimate of how much.
Nothing for Miss Moreno or Mr. Easter, potentially for Dr. Rosenfeld and Mr. Schutz. But again, I think it's cleanup, but maybe leave me 15 minutes or so for each.
Thank you, Ms. Mandel. Okay, let me look very briefly at my calendar and do some arithmetic before I make any more statements. Sorry, Mr. Moody, did you go ahead?
I was just going to say, I mean, our suggestion would be that we would plan to do on Monday Easter, Schutz, Rosenfeld, Field, and then if Mr. King was to be testifying in the morning, and then maybe on Tuesday, and then we would plan for Miss Marino after Mr. King, late Tuesday morning or Tuesday afternoon. And that way we kind of at least give her maybe a little bit more buffer to be available and then try to add some certainty to the schedule.
Yes. And that I see Mr. Hitchings nodding on my screen. So that's great. So let's lock that in. Let's have those three witnesses, Mr. Easter, Mr. Schutz, and Dr. Rosenfield, plan on being with us on Monday in that order. And please let us know, Mr. Mooney, if that order is going to change. But let's plan on that. And then we can plan on, is Mr. King here?
I haven't seen him online
Okay,
today
well,
or yesterday.
yes, and by my calculation, Mr. King has, I think, 23 minutes of time remaining to provide his summary. And Mr. Hitchings, can you give me a rough estimate for cross-examination of Mr. King?
Probably about 45 minutes, maybe a little more.
Okay, that sounds good. So we should be done with Mr. King if all goes swimmingly on Tuesday morning. A member of my team is reminding me that Mr. King suggested he would not be available next week, which is problematic.
I actually think that was this week, he said, and he preferred next week because he had some family obligations this week, and that may be why he's not here today.
Oh, okay.
That was my understanding as well.
All right, great. Well, if there is a party or parties who have the ability to communicate with Mr. King, I would suggest that they let him know that he should be prepared to provide his direct testimony and be prepared for cross-examination on Tuesday morning.
We will let him know. I mean, our NGOs will make an effort to reach out to him and let him know.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. And then we can, and I understand Ms. Moreno, is experiencing some health issues, and I'm sympathetic to that. We will slot her in for the 11th after Mr. King is complete, and Mr. Mooney, if that schedule changes, and I recognize that it's not entirely within your control, but do let everybody know so we can plan accordingly.
Okay, and we'll obviously be in contact with her or reach out to her to let her know the new schedule and see if it works with her situation.
Great. Then I'm cautiously optimistic we will be finished by the end of the day on Tuesday. So fingers crossed for that. Any other housekeeping items that we should address now that we've locked in the schedule as best as we can?
Yes, Mr. Bivens, just a follow-up. I think Presiding Officer Kenzie last week had indicated that she had intended to, at least for the site's authority, to take their hour, moving our evidence, our exhibits and testimony into evidence. So we'll be prepared to do that next week at the appropriate time. And I guess if we're concluded, that may be the case for all the parties. But she did note her intent last week about that procedural issue.
Yeah, if I know Ms. Kenzie, I suspect we may do it all at once, and it'll either happen at the end of the day on Tuesday or perhaps on Wednesday morning. But I won't speak for her on that. That's just my educated guess. But fair enough. Thank you for raising that. Anything else from the parties before we adjourn? All right. Well, thank you all for your professionalism this week and putting up with the substitute hearing officer. You'll be back with Ms. Kenzie next week. And thanks very much. We're adjourned.
Thank you.